the point being, God is well pleased with Jesus, and he hasn't done anything that we would normally think of to earn that pleasure. He just is who he is, and God is pleased with him. And I know myself as a father that, there's that sense with any of our children, Randy, that we are pleased with them, and they may do some great things, they may do some crazy things, but, there's really nothing they can do that would take away our love for them.
Right.
That's kind of what we're talking about here, the love of a father or a mother for a child, that the child doesn't need to accomplish anything. We are just pleased with them. We are just glad that they were born.
Welcome to the Faithful and True podcast. I'm Randy Evert, your co-host, and today we'd like to offer you a episode from our Legacy collection featuring Dr. Mark Laaser, and it is from the 7 Desires series. Here, Mark and I have the opportunity to talk about the desire to be blessed. Here now is Dr. Mark Laaser and the Faithful and True podcast.
Welcome to our show today. Randy, we're continuing our series on the 7 desires of the heart that Debbie and I have written about and speak about. Today we are arriving at the 3rd desire that we described, the desire to be blessed.
Well, there's many a day that I'm happy to report that I feel blessed. So this is a desire that I think our listeners are going to enjoy learning more about and its value.
Now, to understand blessed, I think you have to go back and review a little bit about what we talked about last week, which was the desire to be affirmed. The desire to be affirmed is the desire to be told positive things about actual behaviors that you've done. It's to be thanked. It's to be complimented. And when we get to the 3rd desire, it's related. But one of the big distinctions is that when we feel blessed, we feel that people admire us, approve of us, want to be with us, celebrate us, regardless of what we've done.
Well, it's interesting because it's a term that I have noticed has become quite popular even when you're watching professional sports. And by that, I was watching an interview, following a game last weekend, and one of the star athletes was, being interviewed about his performance or about the opportunity that he's being given. And I'm seeing, and maybe it's just an indication of professional athletes who are believers, but at the same time, the term, I feel blessed to have this opportunity. I feel blessed to be on this team. Mm-hmm. Even to the point that a player will be asked his chances of making the team with all of the NFL teams in camp right now. And I kept hearing the analogy, I feel blessed to have this opportunity. So I think it's interesting that it's also one of the 7 desires of the heart, the desire to be blessed.
Yeah, and even I think in raising that example, I would say that there's some slight element there of confusion about the difference between affirmation and blessing, meaning that and it's very common to say, I feel blessed that I have the talent, that I have the opportunity, that I've been given the chance. I think that's a common thing to say. I would call it good fortune. I would call it calling. I would call it, perhaps even as a person of faith, the intervention of the Holy Spirit. I think one of the keys, though, to understanding blessing is that, let's say, the same person who is being interviewed doesn't make the team, doesn't ever play in the NFL. I think if at the end of that realization and the acceptance of the fact that he's gone as far as he's going to go, at that point he could say, I feel blessed, meaning that he has people in his life, whether or not he made it in the NFL or not, that celebrate him, that love him, that accept him, that find him to be a valuable human being. So, in other words, one of the ways I think we think about blessing is that it's that sense of unconditional acceptance. You know, we don't have to perform, we don't have to accomplish, we just have to be who we are, and people enjoy us and want to be with us.
When you and Debbie wrote the book, The 7 Desires of Every Heart, when were you struck by the fact that to be blessed, should be included in the book?
Well, I think it's because so many people don't feel that sense of unconditional love and acceptance. I think it's also because in our field, all the men that we work with have at some level screwed up and rather egregiously or seriously sinned. I think there's a part of them that despite the fact that they have made many, many mistakes, committed many, many sins, they still want to be known that they're acceptable, fine, good human beings. Mm-hmm. I remember thinking about it back in those early days that because of the fact that my story had been on the front page of the local newspaper, I remember the feeling inside myself that I would like, if I had the money and opportunity, to take out a full-page ad in that same newspaper that simply said, Mark Laaser is not such a bad guy, because all the news stories were making me out to be kind of a bad guy. I think the desire to be blessed is the desire that, we're a good person, we're not a bad person, we're worthwhile, we're acceptable, we're basically at heart and in our basic core, we are good people.
Well, before we go to break here, I think it's interesting that the listeners, if they have never read the book, which, by the way, is now available in paperback as well under the simplified title of 7 Desires. Both books, hardcover and softcover, are available at faithfulandtrue.com in our bookstore. But, what I have noticed since we started this series is we have been contacted by some of our listeners, and, they want to know more about the book. And I think this is exactly what we're going to do through this series. And I think in the end, we will probably end up taking this series of 7 shows and combining them so that we can have a CD to offer that is kind of a visual or an audio. It's not an audio version of the book because there's much, much more depth to the book and how you and Debbie have written it. But if you're interested in learning more about the 7 Desires, we do encourage you to visit our website, to visit our bookstore, and to order 7 Desires or the 7 Desires of Every Heart. Let's get back to today's program, in which we are talking about the third of 7 desires, and that is the desire to be blessed.
One of the biblical stories that we always find interesting when we start teaching about this desire is the story of Jesus and his baptism. I think most of our listeners have some basic Bible knowledge, and they'll be familiar that, before Jesus really started his career teaching, he was a carpenter. He worked for his father, who was a carpenter, and that was not uncommon in those days for a father to follow in the footsteps, or a son to follow in the footsteps of his father. So Jesus, up until roughly age 30, was a carpenter and built things. There's some speculation, by the way, theologians love having speculative discussions with each other about now what kind of carpentry, and there's some debate as to whether or not he made furniture or whether he made boats. Boats seem to be a theme throughout the New Testament, so there's some speculation that he made boats as a carpenter. But then, of course, his cousin John, who has gone before him and is baptizing, Jesus comes to John to be baptized, and there is that story there where God speaks to him from the clouds and says these words, "This is my son with whom I am well pleased." Now, from that, I put it in context and say, God is saying that he's well pleased with his son, but his son really hasn't done any of the work that his father has sent him to do. He's done work that his earthly father has asked him to do. The point being, God is well pleased with Jesus, and he hasn't done anything that we would normally think of to earn that pleasure. He just is who he is, and God is pleased with him. And I know myself as a father that, there's that sense with any of our children, Randy, that we are pleased with them, and they may do some great things, they may do some crazy things, but there's really nothing they can do that would take away our love for them.
Right.
That's kind of what we're talking about here. The love of a father or a mother for a child, that the child doesn't need to accomplish anything. We are just pleased with them. We are just glad that they were born.
Well, and it leads to that unconditional love that we've talked about before. I think when we talk about our love for our children, that is really specifically that level of love and commitment and acceptance of our children, no matter how they behave. You can't escape the fact that we are always going to unconditionally love them.
Well, you and I might say that, but there's certainly any number of the men and women that we work with who did not experience that. I mean, they didn't feel unconditionally loved. They felt that their parents' approval was definitely conditional, that they needed to get good grades or they needed to go to certain activities or sports or colleges or whatever else it is. In other words, a lot of parents aren't necessarily good at the unconditional love. They may somewhere deep inside them unconditionally love their children, but they don't let them know that. They're always setting out different standards for them to achieve. And then there's certainly what we would call anti-blessing, where some children have grown up with the feeling that they're not wanted, they're not loved. One of the interesting dynamics, I don't want to go off on too big of a tangent, but I do think that, children that are adopted, they are given up perhaps for some very good reasons by their biological mothers and fathers, and placed in very loving Christian homes or whatever. I mean, they're placed in great homes, and yet there's still a part of them that feels unwanted. That's a deep part of themselves. It's about a deep level of attachment. This is nobody's fault. We're not judging anybody. We might all agree that certain, biological parents, if they're 15, 16 years old and they give up a child to a better family that will give them a better chance, that's probably a good thing. I'm just saying that, those children are still at some point going to have to, deal with a decision about being loved, blessed, which is what we're talking about here. I remember talking to one of our men, this is years and years ago, who, went after one accomplishment after another. He went to West Point. After West Point, he went to medical school. He became a very leading physician in the United States military. And all his life, he grew up with the fact that his mother was like 44, 45 when he was born, and all his brothers were at least 10 years older than he was, and his mother had been anticipating the empty nest. So when this guy came along, his mother let him know most days of his life that he was a mistake, that he was really not wanted, that he was an accident, and that's what we would call anti-blessing. Some of us grew up without any sense of being celebrated, honored. One way to know about this one is when you were growing up, what were your birthdays like? How were your accomplishments celebrated or treated or whatever it was? I know that the people who struggle with this one the most, they wonder what it is that they need to do in order to finally feel that sense of blessing.
When you and Deb are working with couples, how is it that you represent or explain to them, this particular desire in applying it to their relationship?
Well, one of the interesting things about this is that I think we look at our partner, our spouse, as being a place where we would love to get unconditional love and acceptance. And one of the things we teach is that, it's really the job of parents to be the unconditional people
love givers.
that, when we get married, there is that sense of wanting our partner to love and accept and put up with whatever it is we do. But that's pretty unrealistic, at least for sure in the early days of a relationship. Later on down the road, we can screw up and make some mistakes. And if our partners stay with us, then that can be a sign of blessing. I think, for Debbie to have stayed with me after 15 years of marriage, after the disclosure of all of my stuff, I think that was actually an act of blessing. But inherent in that was me changing my behaviors and becoming more the man that God called me to be, particularly when it comes to fidelity and so forth. And from that point on, I think Debbie was able to move to a place of forgiveness, which at that point, forgiveness can be definitely a part of blessing, it was definitely a blessing for Debbie to decide to stay, that kind of thing.
Are there other aspects like that? That's a perfect example. Forgiveness seems to be a perfect kind of sidebar emotion or aspect to being blessed. Are there others that come into that same kind of category as forgiveness?
Well, I do think that another thing that we could add to the list there with forgiveness is, and again, it's dependent on whether or not that whatever the behavior is that has caused the damage or the harm, if the husband, in our case, the men who struggle with addiction, if they have changed their behaviors, if they've gotten sober, then it can also lead to acts of forgiveness, but it also leads to reconciliation. Reconciliation means that I decide to continue to live with you because I do notice that you are changing and you are becoming a different person. Forgiveness does not always imply that we reconcile. We can forgive those who've harmed us, even though they might not have changed, and if we're around them, they might continue to harm us. So forgiveness does not always mean reconciliation, but if the change is in place about behaviors, then I think forgiveness and reconciliation go hand in hand.
Would there be any other aspects that you want our listeners to understand as we get towards the end of today's show? Are there any other aspects that you want to share about this particular desire?
Well, I think one of the great confusions, and we kind of started by talking about, I think, the fact that the second desire, the desire to be affirmed, and the desire for blessing are often confused. And what we generally mean by that is that if we've never felt like we've had the blessing or that unconditional love or that unconditional desire to be wanted and to be loved and so forth, I think our wires get crossed and we think that there are things that we have to accomplish or things that we have to do to get the blessing. I'm fond of a lot of movies, as our listeners I think probably know at this point, and one of the movies that is very powerful, I don't recommend watching it for a Friday night's fun, popcorn night, but Schindler's List is a really dark story of the Holocaust, and there is this one German, Arthur Schindler, who decides in his factory to try to save as many Jews as he can, and he winds up saving a few hundred of them. At the end of the movie, all he's gone through to trick the Germans and do whatever about this, the Jews are celebrating him. The Jews have taken some jewelry and melted it down and made a ring for him in gratitude, and they're sending him off. The Allies are coming in. They're going to be liberating all of this. And so they're presenting him with this ring out of appreciation. And he breaks down sobbing. He says, if I had only done a little more, I could have saved another life or two or three. If I'd sold this car, whatever else. And his right-hand man during this whole movie, who's really been the business mind behind all of this, kind of whispers in his ear, "You did enough." Then he says, "You did so much." I think all of us are longing to hear those words, that we did enough. Whatever it is we're called to do, whatever it is our Heavenly Father has in store for us, we've done enough. We don't need to do anything to earn God's love. That's the ultimate source of blessing. We don't need to write more books. I think of that for myself. I think I used to think that if you wrote a book and got it published, you'd be blessable. Well, or got a Ph.D. degree, you'd be blessable. I now know today that those kinds of things don't bring you blessing. What brings you blessing is the sense that the people love you despite whatever you've done. And God is that way. Despite all of our sins, as the Bible so frequently teaches us, God decided to send his only son for us. So, I'm not going to preach any more sermons now. I'm just saying the source of ultimate blessing is God. And then, I think one of our challenges is to bless others. It's not just to sit around and long for others to bless us, but, how can we be a blessing to our children and to our communities and to people we care about?
Thank you for joining us today on the Faithful and True podcast. This legacy presentation featuring Dr. Mark Laaser and myself just reminds me how much we used to enjoy our time together and our meaningful conversations. Mark always had a great way of delivering a powerful message, and the 7 Desires collection was amongst the very best. So we hope that you enjoyed that. We hope that you'll visit our website, faithfulandtrue.com, where you'll find lots of information, lots of online opportunities to read and join our 3-day intensive workshops. We offer the Men's Journey Workshop every month for men, and then on a quarterly basis, we offer the Women's Journey Workshops and also Couples Journey Workshops. So check that all out at faithfulandtrue.com. In the meantime, we hope that this coming week will be a week for you that's filled with many blessings and with great vision.